And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I appreciate you joining me here on Now TV, and I hope that the study that we've launched into will be of a tremendous aid to you. Now, remember, we're looking at everything under the umbrella of the challenge of Christ. Jesus said in John chapter 10:37, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Now, hang on just a moment. Enjoying some coffee. Yes. Okay. Jesus said, if I don't do what the Father gave me to do, don't believe me. And yet, as I've shared with you before, Christianity has a problem. I mean, a serious problem. It is a problem recognized by Jews, by Muslims, by atheists and agnostics. Because you see, they know. They know that in spite of all of the attempts by Christian, quote, apologists to explain away all the language of the New Testament, they know that Jesus did in fact say he was coming back in the first century. They know, without a doubt, the New Testament epistles written by several men all said Christ was coming back in the first century. And, you know, I've got to tell you, I've spoken with atheists who knew what the predictions were. They knew how the, shall we say, the run-of-the-mill Christian minister tries to explain the language away, and they literally laughed at it. They know that the normal explanations to avoid the power of what the Bible says about when the Lord was coming, you can't just wave your hand at it. And they know that the book of Revelation predicted the time of the end. Just this week, I've watched a couple of programs on education TV. And I've sat there and I got frustrated, okay? I got frustrated because on this program, it was discussing, the Bible's prediction of the end of the world. Every single one of the authorities, every single one of the scholars was talking about, it's very clear. It's undeniable. Jesus and the Jews of the first century expected the end of the world in that generation. But of course they were wrong. Everybody knows they were wrong. As one scholar said, being familiar with the language of the Bible forces us to rethink our faith. Well, yes, being familiar with the language of the Bible, knowing that God can tell time, knowing that God communicates truthfully in time, has caused many, many people to abandon their faith. Listen, I've corresponded with people through the years, probably hundreds of people, who had lost their faith in Jesus, in God, in the Bible. Because after all, yeah, Jesus said he was coming back. He didn't do it. Bible can't be trusted. Jesus was a liar. He was a failure. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I spend so much time on this program emphasizing the language of the Bible I spent probably almost a year emphasizing the nature of Hebraic apocalyptic language. Now, what does that mean? Well, Hebraic apocalyptic language sounds like the end of the world. It certainly does. Sun being darkened, moon turning to blood, stars falling from the sky. Sounds like the end of the world. But I demonstrated for you and with you that language was never, ever intended to be taken literally. And listen, the key issue here truly is hermeneutic. Just this morning, okay, on my YouTube channel, there was a fellow and he and I have been going back and forth just a little bit. And he made a comment in his very first post about how I obviously didn't believe the Bible. And I'm obviously a false teacher. Because after all, if this is the new heaven and new earth, then God has failed pretty miserably. So we went back and forth a time or two. And finally, when I logged on the computer this morning, I read his comment. His comment was, if we cannot take the Bible and prophetic language literally, there is simply no way to understand the Bible. The Bible and Bible prophecy must be taken literally, or it has no meaning at all. Well, I sat there, I must confess, a little bit stunned that anyone could be so uneducated. But that's a common view, unfortunately. And I'm not trying to be harsh or critical. So I posted back and I said, well, since you've informed us that the only way to interpret Bible prophecy is literally, I said, would you please consider the following? John the Baptizer was the voice of one crying in the wilderness, according to Mark chapter 1, 1-3. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, according to Isaiah chapter 40, would do a couple of things. Number one, he would prepare a highway for our God. Number two, he would fill up every valley. Number three, he would lower every mountain. So I issued a challenge to this gentleman. I said, could you please point me to the highway of God that John the Baptizer created? And by the way, why would God need a literal highway? And I said, by the way, can you point us to the valleys that John the Baptizer filled up? Can you point us to the mountains that John the Baptizer leveled? I'm still waiting for his response. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to become familiar with the language of the Bible. And so people say, yes, the Bible talks about Christ coming soon, quickly and shortly. But God doesn't think in time like we do. God doesn't communicate in time like we do. Now, isn't it interesting that people tell us, Bible says what it means what it says. Oh, except in time words. And you've got to take the Bible literally. Oh, except in time words. There's something wrong here. People are turning things upside down literally when it comes to understanding biblical language. Now, when it comes to the challenge of Christ, as I've already noted, people run to the book of Revelation. And, oh, look, the book of Revelation, great tribulation, abomination of desolation, a 200 million man army, 1,000-year reign. And on it goes. And they insist, well, you see, none of that has happened yet. In spite of the fact that I've shared with you over the last couple of weeks The book of Revelation, at the beginning of it, in the middle of it, and at the very end of it, the book of Revelation tells us over and over and over and over again that fulfillment of this book, not part of it, okay, not just some of it, but that the fulfillment of the vision, and by the way, it's not revelations, plural, it is the revelation, singular, of Jesus Christ. There are not many visions of different periods of time, widely separated from one another. It is one vision. It is one unveiling. That alone should help us to understand the message a little bit better. The book of Revelation recapitulates itself, recapitulates the singular vision over and over and over again. It does not give many different visions. Do you catch the power of that? So, for the last 2 weeks, I've shared with you thoughts on Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. Now, whatever it was that Revelation was predicting, okay? It was coming soon. That ought to inform us right up front, for instance, about the millennium. It doesn't say the millennium was about to come. No, it actually talks about the coming of the judgment and the resurrection at the end of the millennium and says that is what was coming soon. The book of Revelation actually teaches, this is a little bit of a digression, but the book of Revelation actually teaches that the millennium was already fully in force when John wrote. And I'll have more to say about that at a later time. For the time being, I want to focus on the rest of our time this evening, or this morning, excuse me. It's evening when I'm filming. So I want to focus our attention again on Revelation 1:1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to him things which must shortly come to pass. I shared with you last week that the word shortly there is translated from a Greek term, en tokai. En tokai. The question is, was the Father telling Jesus, informing Jesus, to share with the churches that his coming was going to happen soon and quickly and shortly? Well, as a matter of fact, in the letters to the 7 churches, how many times does Jesus say, "Behold, I come quickly"? Now, he doesn't use en tokai there. He uses a shorter form of it, simply of taku or takus. Same root, okay? So what happens? Well, those who want to put the coming of the Lord into your future and mine, they say, well, yes, these things must shortly come to pass, but what it means is there's about 3 or 4 different versions of it. I'm trying to pick the best one. Okay. 1 or 2 versions of the excuses. 1 or 2 versions of the, quote, explanations. One of the versions, one of the explanations, one of the objections is, it doesn't mean that it was coming soon from John's perspective. It wasn't coming shortly from the time John wrote. No, 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 no. What shortly means there is that when it finally begins to happen, it's going to happen rapidly, with speed. In other words, things are going to happen 1,000 miles an hour. It's not when those things would be fulfilled. Now, I want to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to be as kind as possible here, but I want to suggest to you that is an abuse of the Greek language. It is an abuse not only of the linguistics themselves. And look, if you've got a Vines, if you've got a Strong's Concordance, just look it up. If you have an interlinear, go to BibleGateway.com, by the way. BibleGateway.com. Extremely helpful Bible study website. Look up Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. And when it lists it, it will give you the option to look at every single English translation of Revelation 1, verse 1. And you know what you're going to find? You're going to find a humongous preponderance of translations that render Revelation 1:1 as these things must happen very soon. These things must happen quickly and soon. Do you know I have not found an English translation to this point, not one, that renders this text anywhere remotely closely to what people try to say that it means, i.e., well, when it finally starts to take place, it will happen with speed. No translations support that, ladies and gentlemen. Now listen, here's what you've got to understand. In all of these Bible translations, some 56, 57 Bible translations, these are translations both by committees in which you have numerous men, Greek scholars from every imaginable eschatological background. Pardon me. You have men from every conceivable eschatological background. You have men on these committees who believe that, well, what it really means is when it finally starts taking place, it will happen rapidly, with speed. But do you know what? Their scholarship will not allow them to translate it that way. You ought to think about that. So when someone tells you, well, these things will shortly come to pass, that just simply means that when it finally gets around to coming, maybe 1,000,000 years yet. But when it finally starts to happen, I'm telling you, it's going to happen really, really, really fast. Why don't the translations, both committee and individuals, why don't they support that rendering? Because those scholars know if they tried to render it like that, the rest of the scholarly world would condemn what they have done. It's a little bit like this, just as an illustration. In 1987, they came out with a new version of the New American Standard. And in Daniel chapter 12, it was actually rendered as, instead of time of the end, it was rendered as end of time. Now look, mind you, the great majority of Greek scholars, evangelical Greek scholars, believe that the Bible teaches about an end of time. But when the New American Standard Version of 1987 rendered the Hebrew as end of time, they were so attacked, they were so castigated, that in the very next version of the New American Standard Translation, it was changed back to time of the end. And look, folks, pardon me, there's a world of difference between the time of the end and the end of time. Daniel chapter 8, 23 to 26, talks about the appointed time of the end of the Grecian Empire. Well, it's appointed time. It's their last days, but it's not the last days of time, and it's not the end of time. And so we have to be aware that the Bible does not use the term end of time. Now, if it teaches the doctrine, then it's fine to use the term. And I've said that many, many times. Trouble of it is, number one, linguistically, it doesn't use the term end of time. Secondly, it doesn't teach the doctrine. Therefore, it is improper to use a term that not only is not supported linguistically, but is not supported theologically. So I hope you get the point that I'm making here. En Takai, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, simply does not support the idea that the Father was telling John to tell the churches, I'm not going to tell you when it's going to happen. What I am telling you is that when it finally gets around to happening, it's going to happen really, really rapidly. There's no support for that, ladies and gentlemen. The second objection, and as I said, I sat here a moment ago thinking, well, how many of the objections to the rendering of these things must shortly come to pass should I even take note of? Now, let me inform you of this. In my book, Who is This Babylon? I have a special chapter and a very special study entitled, Can God Tell Time? And in that chapter, I examine every objection to the objective nature of the time statements of the Bible that I have heard throughout the years. Now, I must confess, since I wrote the book, I've actually encountered another new objection or two that's been given to me by former preterists who are desperate to destroy the time statements. When I revise the book again at some point of time in the future, I'll probably take note of those objections. So, in the time remaining for me today, and I didn't intend to take up this much time talking about these preliminary and yet important elements, but we are told this other objection is these things must shortly begin to take place. Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, there is not a translation that I'm aware of. There is not a translation that renders Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 as these things must begin to come to pass. As a matter of fact, in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 19, John was told to write concerning the things which have been. Well, those things that already had been certainly are not things that will begin to come to pass. Number two, the things that are. Well, the things that are not things that are shortly to come to pass. They already are. And the things which must come hereafter. Now, most translations render that the things that are to come hereafter. Many translations, however, render it as these things, or right, concerning the things that are about to happen. So we do have the indication that some things are about to take place. And so people latch on to that and say, see, what it means is these things must shortly begin to be fulfilled. Well, that's true in a limited way and in this sense. The things that are past are past. The things that were already were. They were not about to come. So when we say these things must begin to come to pass, it's not totally accurate, because John's going to write about things that already have been. And he's going to write about things and describe things that already are. The only things that John is to write about that are yet future are the things that were about to take place. And it doesn't say some of these things must begin to take place. I hope I'm communicating effectively here. Okay? Because what the objection seeks to do is to say, well, some of the book was about to take place. Some of the book was about to begin to be fulfilled. But the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, there at the end of the millennium, that's a long, long time off. So what we are told, John was being told, is you're going to write about the things which are just about to begin to happen and which will unfold over the centuries, over even the millennia. That's the view I was taught as an amillennial believer. But it's not what the Bible says. Were those things about to shortly come to pass? Absolutely. Were the things that were to come to pass about to take place? Absolutely. And since it's one vision, ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely improper to say, okay, Revelation, 4 and 5, that's talking about the things that were then, but the rest of the book is about things that haven't happened yet. Hey, I'm out of time. I'll pick this up again next week.